or where people struggle to make international payments due to capital controls or other restrictions, that's where you have a place where you have a 10x improvement, where the technology is still useful even in its infancy. So I almost see this as analogous to when Uber was starting, the service wasn't really that convenient. It wasn't really very cost effective. And so they first went after, a small group of consumers that wanted, the sort of Uber black car service. And they focused there and then built out. And I think in the same way, stablecoins have to find that sort of niche group where the limitations of the technology today can be overcome by the step change improvement we're able to make in custody and permissionless payments. But I think today, the technology is in its infancy, and in a place like China or the US where payments are cheap and fast, it's hard to see stablecoins in the near term being used like a credit card.
So I would like to raise one question regarding how the stablecoin have a positive impact on the traditional finance sector, investment sector. Could you address this question?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of how we think stablecoins will benefit traditional finance, we're kind of really seeing just the start of having interest from traditional financial institutions using stablecoins. We always thought that the main way would be to reduce costs. Reduce costs, improve transaction times, and all that kind of stuff. So in theory, if a bank were to send money around the world using stablecoins instead of the traditional SWIFT system or whatever domestic system they were using, we think that's going to reduce cost and basically improve speed. And surprisingly, that wasn't what people were most interested in. One of the ones that people tend to talk about a lot is having full transparency in the system. So a couple of people that we have spoken to.
So they say stablecoin plus STO going to change the whole investment landscape. What do you think about Josh? Josh, you are from investment bank background. So
yeah, it's a really interesting question, I think, because there are a number of jurisdictions out there that have very, very strict capital controls. And on the one hand, you don't want to be seen to be facilitating a breach of capital controls, but on the other hand, there is an inherent demand in various populations to be able to, invest in assets that they simply don't have access to, invest in projects in other jurisdictions that they don't have access to. And I think this goes back to one of the core benefits of blockchain technology, in that it's inherently global. It can be transferred anywhere in a relatively frictionless manner. And so where stablecoins come in is you have a very simple means of payment that is frictionless, that can go anywhere to do anything. So from a commercial perspective, from an investment perspective, whether you're building a business or investing in various businesses, there are all of these inherent tangible benefits in stablecoins, in integrating stablecoins into your various business practices. I think it's only something that a small niche community are using right now. I think slowly over time, more people will realize the power of these frictionless assets. The mere fact that you no longer have to pay Western Union and PayPal 7 to 10% every time you send money across a border. The more they realize this, the more they see opportunities opening up towards them. And I think that's a trend that we're going to see growing over the next couple of years as people slowly wake up and realize, wow, I can actually move my money anywhere I want to for any purpose. And that's very powerful, and it completely revolutionizes the way capital is raised. It revolutionizes the And I think we're really only at the inception point at the moment.
And I think I add a bit to the STO point. I think for those in the room who are not that familiar, the reason why STOs tend to be complicated today is because there's a question of which geography you're in, and a question of what the project does, in terms who can invest in it, and where it can actually be traded on that platform. So most STOs just end up in a space where they can never have any liquidity because it's so complicated to actually have a big group of people to be able to buy and sell it, right? So, you know, we think it's something that has to get sorted out from a regulatory standpoint, because if it doesn't, then only very small companies can actually engage in it.
So, Chai, any ideas?
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing to make a prediction about right now, just in that it's being decided, like, as we speak. There's, you know, Libra has poked the bear, and we're going to see how regulators respond. I think lots of other companies will want to jump in on the stablecoin space, absolutely. I think the way it goes will be largely dictated by the regulatory response. I think a good historical reference point is M-Pesa. So we can think of M-Pesa essentially as a corporate stablecoin. Vodafone or Safaricom sponsored money that took off in Kenya. The interesting part of that story, we often hear about the success story that occurred. It, you know, made payments and banking much more accessible in Kenya. The thing that people talk about less is that the rest of Africa then looked at M-Pesa and said, wow, we really let this get out of hand. We weren't able to stop this from, you know, totally supplanting the banks and creating this extremely influential corporation that now sort of dominates financial life in Kenya. And so in many other countries, M-Pesa hasn't happened because the regulatory response was so intense in other markets. So I think in this way, like, you know, someone like Libra is going to test the waters, and the way different jurisdictions react is going to dictate the trajectory of corporate-sponsored coins. And I think, again, this, you know, the talk's called Beyond Bitcoin. Bitcoin today fulfills a lot of the use cases of stablecoins very well, and what's important about it is that it remains censorship resistant. And so some of these use cases are sort of inherently transgressive, and Bitcoin, you know, has an ability to resist censorship. I think it's a challenge for people in the stablecoin space to say, you know, which of these use cases can we take on? How much censorship resistance can we achieve so that we are a reliable means of transmitting wealth that resists the political backlash that comes with a lot of these projects? And I think Libra will be the one that, you know, starts that process unwinding.
So we spent quite a few years, a lot of money on capital, and we basically spent a lot of time talking to regulators, talking to government officials about stablecoins. And it took us a very, very long time before we could launch PAX. From when we probably started speaking to people about it, 6 months to a year before we submitted our application was reviewed for almost a year for PAX stablecoin. So, you know, definitely as they come along, I mean, and I would think that if you were Facebook or if you were Walmart or any of these names, and you're letting consumers actually use it, it's going to be something that's going to be under even more scrutiny. Yeah. So it may not be that easy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's going to be an inherent friction that comes from the regulators when they see these corporation-backed assets that have the potential to, for example, supplant cash being used in Walmart, or, you know, these impacts are tangible at the societal level. And I think regulators are very, very risk-averse right now. We've seen the way they've reacted with Libra. That may or may not transfer an asset between themselves in a frictionless, non-KYC way. You can absolutely understand why regulators would freak out about that. So we've seen the first volley of shots fired across the bow at Telegram. It's currently being duked out in federal court in New York at the moment. And I think that is a sign of things to come. As soon as these corporations that already wield a huge amount of power, as soon as they get their hands on an asset and say we're imminently going to let this asset be available to our users in public, I think we're going to see some very interesting regulatory and law enforcement action there, because it simply represents too much of a threat.
Okay. There's many people make a statement like that. The reason there's a stablecoin is because it's a fiat channel issue. because they're very difficult to have easy access to fiat channel. That's why they invented Tether. So if the fiat channel, like very convenient, it directly linked to your exchange account, so why we still need a stablecoin? So do you think, let's say in 5 years, stablecoin going to become a history with mark only?
Right, so happy to take that. Tether really started taking off. It was around for quite a few years, and it wasn't very popular in use, but it started really taking off when a lot of the exchanges lost their fiat payment gateways and had their bank accounts shut down. And that's when you saw the asset size really, really grow. But I think since then, a lot of people who use Tether actually don't want to go back to fiat. Because we have seen exchanges that primarily trade Tether or Bitcoin token-to-token exchanges, as they're called. A lot of them actually have fiat channels today. But still, the bulk of their volume is Tether or some other stablecoin or BTC. And I think that just goes to show that once you get users used to something that represents cash, but it's so much more convenient, there's no need for you to go back to the other way. So I kind of see that as just a really good thing that help people recognize that stable coins are actually more useful. And I think that making it more convenient, and the next step would be to have stable coins and cash really be almost the same thing, which is what HUSD and us we're trying to work on together, is to basically make it fungible. It's cash. Call it anything you want. And I think when that happens, people know that it's convenient. They wouldn't think about, do I want to use this or that, because it's the same thing. It's just the fastest free method to do anything.
So it's a little bit of time, but the user as a payment, if the stable
super interesting. I think the real question, though, for us is like, where is that actually useful for people? I think that's where, in instances when people want to store their wealth in USD and they're unable to do it. So it's in countries like Brazil where you can't have a USD-denominated bank account, USD-denominated bank account, but there is some amount of currency risk. Having a Visa card backed by something like Reserve or Paxos or HUSD would be really interesting in a market like that.